Shalom, and welcome to What the Watchman Sees, a ministry that will sift through all of the social media noise to show you news of importance from the Most High's perspective. As watchmen, we are here both to warn of dangers and give biblical answers for dwelling in the secret place of the Most High during these times of confusion. Tell your family and friends to like, share, and subscribe as we delve into what Yahweh has for us, the apple of His eye. Let's get to work. Shalom, beloved. We're going to continue with our meditation on this week. We're dealing with the fall feast in general, and these next few days we're dealing with the Feast of Booths, or Sukkot, in particular. So we've already done the beginning of that. This study is to continue on those same lines. So we're just going to start as a quick review. We were looking at the Feast of Tabernacles as it is explained in Leviticus chapter 23, starting at verse 33. So we talked about that the last time. We're not going to read the scriptures. We'll read the scriptures one more time and then delve a little bit deeper into it. This is a 7-day commemoration, and then on the 8th day it closes out. So Leviticus chapter 23, starting in verse 33. And Yahuwah said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Feast of Tabernacles to Yahuwah begins, and it continues for 7 days. On the first day there shall be a sacred assembly. You must not do any regular work. For 7 days you are to present an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. On the 8th day you are to hold a sacred assembly and present an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. It is a solemn assembly. You must not do any regular work." Verse 37. "These are Yahuwah's appointed feasts, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies for presenting offerings by fire to Yahuwah, burnt offerings and grain offerings, sacrifices and drink offerings, each on its designated day. Verse 38. "These offerings are in addition to the offerings for Yahuwah's Shabbats, and in addition to your gifts, to all your vow offerings, and to all the freewill offerings you give to Yahuwah. On the 15th day of the 7th month, after you have gathered the produce of the land, you are to celebrate a feast to Yahuwah for 7 days. There shall be complete rest on the first day and also on the 8th day. On the first day you are to gather the fruit of majestic trees, the branches of palm trees and boughs of leafy trees, and of willows of the brook. And you are to rejoice before Yahuwah your Elohim for 7 days. You are to celebrate this as a feast to Yahuwah for 7 days each year. This is a permanent statute for the generations to come. You are to celebrate it in the 7th month. You are to dwell in booths for 7 days. All the native born of Israel must dwell in booths, so that your descendants may know that I made Yasharel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahuwah your Elohim." Verse 44, "So Moses announced to the Yasharelites the appointed feast of Yahuwah." Okay, so we read Leviticus chapter 23, verses 33 through 43. This particular commemoration is a time of joyous commemoration. Now, right before that, we had the Day of Atonement, which was a solemn assembly, but it was in preparation for it. Sometimes the people would fast and deny themselves. But during this feast, this is actually a time of commemorating how the Most High has been delivering his nation from its inception. As we said earlier, it is the last of the fall feast. It begins on the 15th day of the 7th month, and it is celebrated for 7 days. The first day is a Shabbat, or a solemn assembly, where the entire nation comes together. As they come together, they are to gather fruit, as it says, of majestic trees. The fruit that would have been gathered would have been the fruit of the vine, talking about the grapes, and the fruit of the olive trees, because all of the rest of the produce had been gathered earlier on. So this is the gathering of the fruit that the scriptures are talking about during this particular season. Then the nation was to present an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. These offerings are found throughout the feast days, not only at the 7 feast days, but also there's an offering given for Passover, for instance, or the Feast of First Fruits, which we call Pentecost. So the offering is a part, the offering by fire is a part of the order of service as the nation is serving the Most High in this way. We should also be reminded that this feast in particular, all came from the Most High through his leadership to the people. So these were feasts. This feast in particular was a national feast. Each family had a part to play in it, but they commemorated the feast as a nation. This is one of those 3 assemblies that the Most High told Israel 3 times a year, you're to come to Jerusalem and celebrate and commemorate these Moedim, okay, or the times of meeting me. So this was one of those 3 times. This was the last of those 3 times, okay? As it says, part of the job of the individual families in the nation was to make temporary shelters and make them out of the branches and the leaves of the trees surrounding them for 7 days. This was to remind them of how the Most High had kept them when they left Egypt and spent those 40 years in the desert. They actually lived in the same type of structures. They were temporary structures, obviously. We call them tents in modern times, but they call them tabernacles or booths. They were made out of the trees that were on the land they walked through. So that was those 7 days of living in the booths were to remind the children of Yasharel of that national experience, how the Most High took care of them and protected them through those 40 years. On the 8th day, there is another solemn assembly. And that's how the Feast of Booths is ended. Okay, so they come together at the beginning as a nation, and they end as a nation in remembrance of what the Most High has done. Once again, although these 2 days are called solemn assemblies, the Feast of Booths in general is a time of joy, okay, which is different than some of the other times that the Most High told his people to come together. There's a verse in Zechariah chapter 14. I think I'm going to read that. Zechariah chapter 14, starting in verse 16. says, "And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles." I just read verse 16 of Zechariah chapter 14. Verse 17 says, "And it shall be that whoever will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahuwah of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, they have no rain, there shall be the plague, wherewith Yahuwah will smite the heathen that comes not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles." Verse 20, "In that day shall there be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto Yahuwah, and the pots in Yahuwah's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yes, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto Yahuwah of hosts, and all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them and seethe therein in the day. There shall be no more the Canaanite in the house of Yahuwah of hosts." I wanted to read that because, and as we go through this particular study, what we will find is the Feast of Booths before and after Yasharel's interaction with it was part of what the Most High has in mind for his creation on the earth. Because the whole point of the Feast of Booths is that the Most High is dwelling with his people and that his people must rely on him. So what I just read, some people would say that that has to do with the millennial kingdom, for instance. But the point is, once the king is in Jerusalem, everyone is going to do the same thing, or everyone is expected to do the same thing, not just Yasharel. But Yasharel, you're the example. You're the first to actualize this particular feast. But what Zechariah tells us in Zechariah 14, 16 through 21, is that the expectation, including Egypt, which means including those who are against us as Yah's people, they are expected to do the same thing. Because it's not focused on us, it's focused on him. Now we're going to look at several other biblical passages that speak about this Feast of Tabernacles. So if we were to go to Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 13 through 17, you remember Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the second telling of the Most High's blessing for his people. It also includes some of the curses that will happen if his people continue to walk away from him. But in Deuteronomy chapter 16, this second telling, the instructions are given again about the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths. Okay, so again, it tells our people for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your wine press. And I wanted to remind us that that is in fact what we're looking at. It mentions wine press because if you remember what I said a few minutes ago, the harvest that is reaped is a harvest of the grapes or the vineyard, and the harvest of the olive trees. So once you harvest them, you process it, and the processing of the grapes turns into wine. The processing of the olives turns into oil that sustains light in the nation. Okay, because the oil is used as a fuel for the lamps, as well as other things too. But in other words, it's what you need to sustain yourself. All right. So that's Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 13 through 17. It comes up also in Numbers 29, verses 12 through 38. Now, we're not going to read all of that, but these are the things, as you see on the screen, that are outlined in how you spend each one of those 7 days. This is why we have that particular thing on the screen. I hope you can see it right here. Let me see if I can make it a little bit more clear. So we're talking about this information right here. Hopefully you can see it. Day 1, on the Feast of Booths, after the nation is gathered, or as the nation is gathered, they are to take 13 bulls, two rams, not lambs, but rams, 14 lambs, and that these are all offerings now, including the grain offerings. Let me just say also, when you're reading the passages in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and you hear about a meat offering or a wave offering, that is actually grain or fruit. Okay. So when the Bible talks about, in those passages, when the Bible talks about meat, it's not talking about flesh and flesh meat. It's talking about grain. Okay. But on that day, they were to sacrifice, again, 13 bulls, 2 rams, 14 lambs, and then in addition to all of that, grain offerings. Clearly, that takes a lot of time. Okay. So whether they were in the desert during those 40 years at the tabernacle, or whether they were in Jerusalem, having settled in the land, this was pretty much a day-long thing. They would sacrifice all of those animals, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail with that. Now, so that's day 1. On day 2, what happens is it's everything except one less bull. So on day 2, you have 12 bulls, 2 rams, etc., etc., etc. On day 3, you have 11 bulls, etc., etc., etc. And it says each following day, 1 fewer bull until the 7th day. So all of the days are spent giving offerings to the Most High, giving sacrifices and offerings to the Most High, because all of these animals are killed, and then their blood is taken and put on the horns of the altar. Okay, so that was a huge part of their commemoration, which is also a huge part of all commemorations, because what Israel was being pedagogically taught is that life is precious. The life of the innocent had to be taken so that they could have life. Now, as the scriptures say in Hebrews, all of this was a shadow of things that were to come, because the thought is the life, L-I-F-E, is in the blood. So when you shed blood, you are actually shedding or taking a life. So the Most High was telling his people, in order for me to save you, someone's life has to be given. And it's because of the sin that you are living in. So those animals were to represent that. That was the protocol. Every day of those 7 days, a number of bulls, a couple of rams, 14 lambs, and then the grain offerings. All of that is done during the course of the day. So over the week, a total of 70 bulls, 14 rams, 98 lambs, and 7 goats were sacrificed for Israel. But again, this was a time of rejoicing. Okay. So even in rejoicing, people understood something innocent had the life of something innocent had to be taken so that they could have joy and therefore be in right relationship with the Most High. Now, let's read Nehemiah, this next one. Let's read Nehemiah chapter 8. Nehemiah chapter 8. We're going to start at verse 13. The title in scripture is The Feast of Tabernacles Restored. Nehemiah was the prophet who came back to the land of Yasharel after they had been in Babylonian captivity for those 70 years. So once they got back into the land, you might have heard of the saying Nehemiah's 52 days, because once he and the people with him came back to the land, one of the first things that they did was to rebuild the wall so that they could be protected to rebuild the city. We've done extensive lessons on that as well. We may want to revisit that. But in any case, so what they were doing was they were coming back into the land and they were reestablishing their society. And part of the society that they were reestablishing were the feast days. So when we read Nehemiah chapter 8, starting in verse 13, they are actually reinstituting the things that we just talked about. So starting at verse 13, it says, and on the second day were gathered together the chief of the fathers of all the people, the priest and the Levites, unto Ezra the scribe, even to understand the words of the law. See, the instructions to do all of these things were written down in the Torah or the Tanakh. That's how they knew what to follow. Why do we think that just because Yeshua instituted I won't say so-called, the new covenant, that it wasn't built upon the foundation of what we call the old covenant? So one of the weaknesses of our people, it's been a continual weakness. The way that the scriptures describe it is, in those days there was no word from the Lord, and every man did what was right in his own eyes, which is why the Most High had to send prophets to straighten all that mess out. I'm bringing that up because we're living in that kind of day now. In that kind of day now, everybody thinks that because of Jesus, we can just do whatever we think is okay. But that's not biblical. There are no biblical examples for doing that. Everything is built upon another, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. That's how our relationship with the Most High works. So when Nehemiah and the people with him, including Ezra, went back into the land, they had to reestablish that which the Father had given them, because their disobedience had gotten them kicked out of the land. So the way that you correct what you have done wrong is you go back and you do what you should have done in the first place. That's the Most High's message for us, his people, today. So it says in verse 14, and they found written in the law, which Yahuwah had commanded by Moses, that the children of Yasharel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month. We're right back to the Feast of Tabernacles. Verse 15 says, and that they should publish and proclaim in all their cities and in Jerusalem, saying, go forth into the mountain, fetch olive branches and pine branches and myrtle branches and palm branches and branches of thick trees to make booths, as it is written. Verse 16, so the people went forth and brought them and made themselves booths, every one upon the roof of his house, and in their courts, and in the courts of the house of Yahuwah, and in the street of the water gate, and in the street of the gate of Ephraim. Now, in essence, what the Most High told his people to do is take the material from your surrounding environment and make your shelter from that, because I will always provide shelter for you. I will always provide food for you. I will always provide sustenance for you. I never will let you go lacking when you're at least trying to do things in accordance with my will. And that's one of the major points of rejoicing for the Most High's people. So keep that in mind if you choose to commemorate this particular feast, that you don't have to buy the most expensive tent. What our ancestors were able to do is stay dry, stay comfortable, relatively speaking, just by using what the Most High had already provided for them in the environment. Okay, so I won't say anything more about that. Now, I'm gonna wait until the very end to talk about John chapter 7, because all of these scriptures are pointing to our Messiah. All of them. They're all pointing to our relationship with our Messiah. We're going to stop here for right now, and then we'll pick up on that theme in our next